sila. Hello everyone. Good afternoon.
Afternoon,
So today we're gonna be doing the task 7. Ano task 7 learn?
which is the setup DHCP server role. So let's go.
So first is i-open nato to server manager. So installing woman ni ano DHCP.
So we're already installed it.
Kaya na naman ni DHCP. So katora ni siya DHCP. Skip na mo guro ni. Na naman kay DHCP di ba?
Ano na tayo DHCP. Tapos na, kuha na natin na config na natin na dito.
Notification for DHCP. The DHCP post-install configuration
Na-config na ba natin na Kent na?
Wala pa.
wizard will now appear. The first window
Ano,
tells us
install
that
na
we will
nato.
need to create the
Install lang,
DHCP
wala pa
administrators and DHCP user
Ay, kaning config, kaning mag-change
security
yung
groups
pangalan.
and authorize the screen. We need to specify a domain user account that has domain administrative permission.
Authorize daw.
Tama, ne? Tama ko na.
Kaya na kung klaro lang daw. Tama na guro. Automatic mo na.
We need to specify a domain user account that has domain administrative permissions. By default, it specifies the account administrator. We know that this administrator account is a domain account because it is prefixed by a domain named by its name, itflee, and a backslash. This account is suitable for the task required, so click on Commit to continue.
Commit lang. Default naman daw.
Next, you will be brought to the summary page where you can see the two tasks that are being completed. The tasks are now completed, so we can close out of the DHCP windows. Now you will notice
Commit. Default naman daw. Tapos
Notice
close.
on the left side of our screen we have a DHCP tab. We can click on this tab
Nadaan naman daw ang duha.
and view information related to DHCP such as events, services, and more. To open the DHCP Management Console, click on Tools, DHCP within Server Manager.
Tools. Tools ng DHCP.
Basta to? Tools.
Tools.
Tapos
DHCP.
Kaya naman.
Then,
The DHCP Management Console will appear and we can see our server is listed along with its IP version 4 and IP version 6 settings. In this course, we will be dealing with the IP version 4 because it's by far the most commonly used protocol. Right now, our DHCP server is not fully functioning because we need to define a scope for it to use. We will do that in the following lectures. Great job getting the DHCP server role installed, and I will see you in the next lecture.
next lecture.
Next lecture.
Production and dish server.
In this lecture, you're going to learn how to create a DHCP scope. We'll be completing this lecture from the ITFDC01 server or any server that has the DHCP server role installed. A DHCP scope is a pool of IP addresses on a specific subnet scope with a continuous 168.0.50. The scope need to create an exclusion. Open the DHCP. Click on the DHCP server we want to configure. In this case, ITFDC0. Click on the
Ibalik siya dito sa DHCP tools.
Click on the DHCP server we want to configure. In this case, ITFDC01.itflee.com. Right click on IP version 4 or IPv4 and select
IPv4 or
New Scope. The new scope wizard will appear.
Right-click on
IPv4 and select New Scope. The new scope wizard will appear. Click Next and specify a scope name and description. This isn't entirely important, it's only for this admin console and no one else. I'm going to enter the scope I intend to use.
I'm going to enter IP version 4.
yan nato na lang scope.
Sundawan dyan nato na lang scope it lang. Dyan dagan mo.
Nagsundugon dyan na ito at IPv4.
Toggle.
Sundugan natin.
Wait lang. Manigurado.
which is
Manigurado ko na ka.
168.0.2 through 254. Click Next and move on to the next screen.
Okay. Ay, wait lang.
Copy naman nila.
IPv. Tama ba na?
Hindi na ako maklaro ha. Ay,
Di
nagamay
na
ba na?
maklaro.
Dakadakin.
Di ba siya kan? Sige lang.
Ay man basta ay nalako, di ba?
0.2 through 254. Click next and move on to the next.
Tama na eh. 192.168 yun.
Select
Huwag ganun 10.
the new scope wizard will appear. Click next and specify a scope name and description. This is
10.10.
entirely important. It's only for this admin console and no one else is going to see it. For the name, I'm going to enter IP version 4 scope. For the description, I'm going to enter the scope I can use, which is 192.168.0.2.
So ito dire kay 10.10.10.10. Ito paana
4. Click next.
2254. Oh ba? Tama akong gibutang.
Diri ni.
Mo gud tag IP ba? Ten lor or
Why?
itong 1 year ko. Sa ganito. Then ito.
Kita ba sa live play?
Ako sa max volume ang
Create a case scope. Specify a scope name based on your odd version 4 scope. For the description, I'm going to use the scope I need. 192.168.0.2. Click next and move on to the next.
Okay.
At 0.2 start and .254 is my. We use 254 because
254 is my end.
And that 10.2.
Starting with .2 because .1 is our
Now and
but
254. Ayun.
length of that master automatically calculated based on the IP range specified in the scope.
Yang LAN.
Settings and these numbers basically come down to math and are way out of the scope of this course. If you are interested in learning how they are calculated, you should learn about subnetting and subnet math.
255 is the network
In the
broadcast
resources of
address.
this lecture, I have
The length
included
and
a link
subnet
to
mask
Cisco,
are automatically
which explains
calculated
subnet
based on the
masks.
IP range we
Check that
specified
out
for
if
the
you're
scope. We can leave these settings
Now
at
let's click
default.
next. And on
These
the
numbers
next screen,
basically come
we're able to specify any
Next na na. Default mo daw.
default ra.
down to math and learn about included by any exclusions we make through 25 so I can keep them for my servers. Now, this range must fall within the scope that we created.
Ano to? 25 na? 25, 10, 10, 10, 1. Ay, wait. So, ito. Tapos, 1,
That top.
10, 10.
Ako nag-loading na akong kung YouTube.
Because I didn't include .1 in my scope. Once you've entered the IP range, click the Add button and click Next. On
25.
the next window, we can specify
25.
how long we want the
Ay, wait
So I
lang.
couldn't exclude .1 through 25 because I didn't
manigurado
include
tayo, manigurado.
.1 in my scope. Once you've entered the IP range, click the Add button and click Next. On the next window, we can specify how long we want the DHCP lease to last. As we've covered before, the lease is how long the client can keep the TCP/IP settings before it needs to come back to the DHCP server for a new lease or configuration. I'm going to keep the default settings of 8 days and click Next.
8 days yung loho. Nasaan mo natin? You there? Hello? Actually, lease. You're specify how long client can use an IP address from the scope. Yung next naman nila next lang.
Before, on the next window, we can specify how long we want the DHCP and click Next. On the next window, we can specify how long we want the DHCP.
This join should be equal to the average time the computer in connected. Extension network. So, mobile network is mainly of portable computers. Current distribution can be useful. The style and feature menu longer distribution are more appropriate.
Tenda-tenda ba jud ang IP? Malipat na pugkuan ni ba? Paita ni wait lang. Sigurado sa color.
Sige.
Tenda today.
Lease to last. As we've covered before, the lease is how long the client can keep the TCP/IP settings before it needs to come back to the DHCP.
Man, like... Gi-add mo rin ako de.
Biar tinggal ni diretso. Pwede yung gap na ma-remove eh.
Okay. So, ano? Okay. Ay, 7 ba? 7
client
na
can keep the DHCP and click
video.
Next. Scope. Once you've entered the IP range, click the Add
Na
button.
sa summer ko na. 1555.
1555.
Now, this range must fall within the scope that we created, so I couldn't exclude .1 through 25 because I didn't include .1 in my scope. Once you've entered the IP range, click the Add button and click Next. On the next window, we can specify how long we want the DHCP.
As we've covered before, the lease is how long the client can keep the TCP/IP settings before it needs to come back to the DHCP server for a new lease or configuration.
I'm going to keep the default settings of 8 days and click Next. On the next screen, we have the ability to configure the default gateway, DNS server, and Win server from the scope. Use the default option. Yes, I want to configure these options now. Check and click Next. Enter the default gateway.
I'm going to keep the default settings of the default gateway, DNS server, and Win server checked. Host only network, which is 192.168.0.1, and click Add, and then click Next.
Okay, Add Next.
The next screen asks us to specify the domain and IP address of our DNS server. This information is automatically populated with the IP address of our DCS and DNS server, which is 192.168.0.10. Click Next to continue. The next screen allows us to specify a Win server. Now, a Win server works much like a DNS server in that it relates host names with IP addresses, but it uses a different protocol than DNS. We do not have a Win server because DNS has replaced this out-of-date feature. Click Next, and now we need to either activate the scope now or do it later. You can do either one you want. I'm going to say no, I will activate the scope later, just so I can show you how to activate it from the DHCP console.
next
Click Next
and finish.
and Finish to
Asa man talo?
Kasi ito,
Yes
no?
or yes or
show
no?
you how to
Yes or no?
We can now
Wait
see the
lang,
new
nag-load
scope
na
that we
ako.
just
Meron
created.
ako pick.
Notice the red down arrow inside of the icon. This means that the scope has not been activated. We can go ahead and right-click on the scope and select Activate.
Local.
Now go ahead and expand the newly created scope. Here we can see the address pool, address leases, reservations.
Loading.
So no.
No, ato
No. Sige, no na lang.
Just so I
Sundo
can
na
show you how to
Okay.
activate it from the DHCP console. Click Next and Finish to complete the wizard. We can now see the new scope that we just created.
activate it.
Notice
We
the
can
red
now see the new
down
scope that we just created. Notice the red down arrow
Notice
inside
the
of
red
the
down
icon.
daw.
This means that the scope
Red
has
down.
not been activated.
Scroll down.
We can go ahead and right-click on the scope and select
Ano ko na naman
Activate
ko?
Scope. Here we can see the
Gawin
address
ako.
pool, address leases,
arrow inside of
reservations,
the icon.
scope
This
options,
means that
and
the scope has
policies.
not been activated.
The address pool is the list
can
of
go ahead and
available
right-click on
IP
the scope
addresses
and
as
select
well as all
Activate.
exclusions.
Right-click.
DHCP addresses that have a DHCP gateway,
Now go
referred to
ahead and
here as the
expand the
route,
newly
allows an
created
admin
scope.
Ano ako,
to
banda
change other.
You can see the address
17 minutes and 52 seconds.
Address pool is the list of available IP
Address
addresses
leases,
as well as all
reservations,
exclusions.
scope options.
The
and
address
policies.
leases screen shows us
The
all the
address
client
pool is the
computers
list
who
of
have received
available
a
IP
TCP/IP
addresses as well as
configuration
all
from
exclusions.
DHCP.
The address
Reservations
leases
simply
screen
list
shows us
all the
all
computers that have a
computers who have
DHCP
received a
reservation.
TCP/IP
The scope
configuration
options
from
allows you to
DHCP.
change other network settings like
Reservations
default
simply
gateway,
list all the
referred to here
computers that
as
have
the
a
router,
DHCP
and
reservation.
DNS servers and the
The
domain
scope
name.
options allows you
A
to change other
DHCP
network
policy
settings like
allows an
default gateway,
administrator to
referred
assign
to here
certain
as the
IP address
router,
ranges
and
to
DNS
certain
servers and the
devices
domain
like
name.
IP
A
phones,
DHCP
desktop computers,
policy allows the
printers, or
administrator
unknown
to assign
devices.
certain
Now
IP
that's
address
everything we
ranges
need to
to
cover for
certain
this lecture.
devices
Great
like
job
IP
getting through this and
phones,
creating your
desktop
first
computers,
DHCP scope, and I
printers,
will
or
see
unknown
you
devices.
in the next
Now
lecture.
that's everything
I'll
we need to
see
know.
you next.
Great job getting
In
through
this
this and
lecture,
creating
we
your
are going
first
to learn how to
DHCP
create a
scope, and I will see
DHCP
you in the
reservation.
next lecture.
We are going to
Let's see on
create
the
a
next lecture.
reservation for our Windows 10 workstation
This lecture,
113
we're going to learn
and
how to
Windows
create
Station, and then we will be ready to create the reservation on our
create a
DHCP
reservation
server,
for
which is
Windows
ITFDC01.
address of 192.168.0.1.
Next, we'll configure the Windows 10 VM to use DHCP for a second networking adapter.
In order to create the DHCP
Kay
reservation,
Windows 10 na po ang KMO niya.
powered up. The first step is to grab the MAC address from our Windows 10 workstation. Then we will be ready to create the reservation on our DHCP ITFDC.
Ha? Ano sa daw?
Config na po
open?
ang Windows 10.
Open na po. Windows 10. Sige. Wala sa
Waiting.
isa man i-minimize.
Adapter and see if it grabs the IP address we reserved for it. Start by logging on to your Windows 10 VM. Open Command Prompt by clicking the Windows button and searching for CMD. Start
Kung mag-open CMD
Command
na po
Prompt by
yun.
selecting
Tapos kung ito na itong na-reserve na ito
it
na
in
po.
the list. We can grab the MAC address of our VM by typing the get mac command, or GETMAC command.
Start by logging on to the Windows 10. Open
Notice that
Command
there are
Prompt by
two
clicking
MAC
the
addresses
Windows button.
presented. This is because we are using two network adapters. We can figure out which MAC address belongs to which networking adapter by looking at the advanced settings of our VM network configuration. On the VM window, click Machine and Settings. Click the Network tab and select
Notice that there are
Adapter
two
2.
MAC addresses.
Expand the advanced drop-down list and look for the MAC address.
Ay, salamat.
Kasi magamit na itong adapter ko.
Magamit to.
Gani ko kagilisan nito, Ken.
Wala, kung gibalik to. 3 to 1, 1 to 3.
Sa ikaduha na, ikaw na. Ikaduha kay 3 to 1. Salazar, Camille, 3 to 1.
Delete, we love 10 day.
Now we can see that the MAC address listed here matches that of the
Wala ka
second
open.
MAC address listed in Command Prompt. This is the MAC address we'll use to create our DHCP reservation because this is the MAC address of the networking adapter that is attached to the same host-only network that our domain controller is using. Click OK to close the settings window. Switch over to our DHCP server, which is ITF-DC01, and open the DHCP management console by opening Server Manager and selecting
So ito yung unang gibuhat.
I-open niya, ito,
Then,
CMD, ito, ibaysan ako CMD na. Tama ba, CMD? CMD.
CMD.
by clicking the Windows button and
Open
searching for
CMD.
CMD.
Ludeg.
Start command prompt by selecting it in the list. We can grab the MAC address of our VM by
Tapos,
typing the
Mac.
get MAC command,
Get
or
Mac.
GETMAC
Mac.
command.
GETMAC.
Sunod.
Notice that there are two MAC addresses presented. This is
Alright,
because
so
we're
MAC
using
address.
two network adapters. We can figure
Yeah,
out
tag
which
MAC
MAC
address.
address belongs to which networking adapter by
Okay, so
looking at
ato
the
tag
advanced
machine,
settings of our
tapos
VM
setting.
network configuration.
Para makita na to sila na
Network
kuhan.
adapter to advanced.
On the VM listed here matches that of the
7A.
second MAC address
You can
listed
see
in
the
command
MAC address
prompt.
listed here.
This is the
matches that
MAC
of the
address we'll
second MAC
use to
address
create our
listed in
DHCP
command prompt.
reservation
This is the
because
MAC
this is the
address
MAC
Asa nasa baba ka?
Nasa taas ito
Nasa ito, okay. Yun ang color.
Sa taas ito.
Okay. Tapos search ba?
address of the networking adapter that is attached to the same host-only network that our domain controller is using. Click OK to close the settings window. Switch over to our
Okay.
DHCP server, which is ITF.
DHCP na full server.
Wait lang. Ito? E.
Nakukaro
Wala. Sama na ako pagpaano ni. Kana lore. Klaro
Kana daw, kana maklaro na. Saan pa kabalo ka na maka-address na 08?
Kane.
08. Ay, dapat para sa video?
Dili, muna ato i-picture na lang ako it lang.
Wait lang. Hindi mo daw, para ka pa daw gamay?
Ako nag-picturean.
Klaro mo guro na sa kuha ba? Hello? May page lang sa Discord natin.
So, dapat kane so dapat kane itong pa. So, click OK. Click OK to, no?
Gumayoy.
Close the settings window.
Close the
Switch over
settings
to our
window.
DHCP server, which is ITF-DC01,
Ato ta sa
and
server
open
na
the
pod balik na pod ta dali.
Server na po balik.
DHCP management console
Para
by
tapos
opening
i-close, no?
Server Manager and
Manager na po.
selecting Tools,
Tools.
DHCP.
Tools, then DHCP.
Expand our server and expand the IP version 4 and our scope.
Expand ng IB4.
And right-click on the Reservations tab and choose
Reservation.
New
Sila ko na naman dito.
ITF-WS001.
IT
Bago na po.
ay isa man eh. Ito Yeah. WS001.
001. Di ba katong ato ang pangalan last kay wala mo to yung number, di ba?
Now I'm going to enter in the IP address that I want this computer to receive, which will be 192.168.0.113.
Ba't sad? Ano na try?
For the MAC address, I'm going to enter
Why?
the MAC address that we got from the Windows 10 workstation by entering the get MAC command.
Okay. So, kanino sa baba? Ibaba ba to? Ibaba mo siguro to. Ibaba dyan dahil.
Ano to, 8? Tama ko? Lang
08. So,
08.
0,
Maklaro.
27. EE. 27. EE. F7. Pwede na makapy. Copy na tingnan. Ano na lang.
Makabi? Sabi na eh.
EE. EE.
EEF7. Hindi okay na gamay ang wifi.
EE. F7. F7.
Dala lang ako, di maklaro.
F7. 09.
09.
09. Kuan daw. Si manigurado na.
Like
Yeah.
French ko rin ako. At hindi ako maklaro. Kita, dictate daw dito speakers daw.
Ang sama na ang
Katong dito sa server.
sama 10.10.10 naman.
Taman 0800.7 double E. Ito mo nakilit sa 7, hindi na mabasa. F?
Ay, anong kaniman? Wrong.
For the description,
Gonna
I'm going to enter ITF workstation
address.
001. For the supported
For the description, CamileSalazar workstation
nervyoso, may
001.
color.
Mahina. Hihihi.
Hindi na ko kape ba?
Sige, copy na si CamileSalazar workstation sa description.
001. At lang.
Ay, dili, dapat na spacing description naman.
types, we're going to leave the default checkbox both checked.
113,
You might be wondering what the
balik ko na magtanaw sa recording. Sa guide.
Hindi lang. 113 may camera. Excuse me.
113 no, 113. 113, Jed.
Wala pa ako nakita net lang. No, 113.
Sigurado na ako kay dito mo mali.
113 po, ako.
Ano? 001 or 01? 01 lang guro ta or 00 saman?
001 lang, kapya lang.
Kaya na lang tato to.
Pero sakto.
May na naman ang mamali ta.
Yan, description.
Description at lang.
BootP option is, so let me explain it. BootP or Bootstrap protocol was designed to dynamically assign IP addresses when computers booted up or powered on. BootP is also capable of pointing the client computer to an image file containing operating systems.
Okay.
Unlike
Tapos
DHCP, BootP can only configure the TCP/IP settings when a client computer.
CamileSalazar workstation.
For the description, I'm going to enter ITF workstation.
Ay, siyong akong na.
What?
Ay, pero de. Ano? Ay, asa man ay kana.
Kabalo. Kung i-caps lock ba mo? Caps lock na lang. 001.
For the supported
001. 001.
types, we're going to leave
Mag-explain niya
was
sa nang
booted,
support.
and not while it was already booted to Windows or while it's up and running at the desktop. Click the Add button, then click Close.
designed to dynamically assign IP addresses when computers booted
We can
up
now
and
see the
powered
new
on.
reservation listed.
BootP is
If we
also
right-click on the
capable
new
of
reservation, we can configure the reservation, delete it, or edit its properties.
Pwede man din ma-delete o edit Add tapos close.
Bali mo.
You can also double-click on the reservation and see the settings for the router, DNS servers, and domain name. Note that you cannot configure these settings here, but you must change them by right-clicking on the reservation and selecting Configure Options.
If we right-click on the new reservation, we can configure the reservation, delete it, or edit its properties. You can also double-click on the reservation and see the settings for the router.
Let's switch over to our Windows 10 VM and switch the IP configuration to DHCP and see if it grabs the new IP settings we reserved for it. Log into the Windows 10 VM,
Awa na,
When the
ipisita no.
desktop fully loads, click the Windows button
Wala
and
ba?
to the DHCP
lang.
and see if
Okay
it
ra
grabs
man.
the new IP
Wala siya
settings
gipang
we
uncheck
reserved
dira.
for
Wala
configuration.
man no?
IP configuration to DHCP.
Tenor niya.
Wait lang, unsa to?
But then
Unsa
click
to? Nasa
Configure
nasa gi ko,
options.
not
nasa
configure these settings here, but you must change them by right-clicking on the reservation
nasa gi
and
pislit.
select configure options.
Let's switch over to our Windows 10 VM and switch the IP
Wala to?
configuration to
Wala no,
DHCP
diba?
and see if it grabs the new IP
Let's
settings
switch
we
over to
reserved
our
for it.
Windows 10 VM.
Log into the
Switch
Windows
naman
10
niya.
VM,
See if it grabs the new IP settings reserved.
and when the desktop fully loads, click the Windows button and search for
When the desktop
Network.
fully loads, click the Windows button and search for Network.
Click the Network and Sharing Center when it appears.
Network.
Click the Network and Sharing Center when it
Select Ethernet 2,
select
Ethernet 2.
Ano to? Network and sharing. Ay, no?
Network and sharing. Oh, network daw.
right-click on the reservation.
Automatic naman na pag network lang.
Option.
Wala daw.
Network?
Let's switch over to our Windows 10 switch the IP
Na Ethernet
to
daw.
kasi
grabs the new IP settings reserved.
net lang.
Log into the Windows 10 and when the
and
desktop
choose
fully
Properties.
loads, click the Windows button and search
Properties daw sa Ethernet to. Tara ka na. Pwede
click the
magyabot na.
Network and Sharing Center when it appears. Select
Properties kaya po na yung Ethernet to. Kana, tama na. Click
Ano click? Tara day. Okay, asa man na ni?
Ethernet 2.
Kani internet to.
Yes. Properties.
Double click IP
Properties.
version 4
Properties.
IP
Tapos
version 4 and check
double click IP version 4.
checkbox. Click OK. Close
Ang
all
baba na yung point.
Asa to?
IP version 4.
by pressing the Windows
and choose Properties.
and run the
Address automatically checkboxes.
when the
Tapos
desktop
i-automatic.
Windows button.
Click
Yes,
OK
sure
and
ba?
close all of the network windows. Now open Command Prompt
Click the
by
Network
pressing the Windows key and searching for CMD and run the IP config command. Here we can see our
Property.
Windows 10 VM has received the IP address that we reserved for it in DHCP.
Obtain an IP
Same din.
address automatic checkbox. Click OK and close all of the network windows. Now open Command Prompt.
Sige, galag, wait lang. Close. Open.
By pressing the Windows key, searching for and run the IP. Here we can see our Windows 10 VM has received the IP address that we
Yung IP config.
Wala.
Now
and
let's switch
searching for
back over to our
CMD
DHCP
and run the
server and
IP
see what's
config command.
Wala.
Here we can see our Windows 10 VM has received the IP address that we reserved for it in DHCP. Now let's switch back over to our DHCP server and see what's changed in the management console.
Tama ba to?
Navigate to the Address Leases tab. Notice we can
Tama na properties din mo.
Tama to. Bagay mo yan eh. Tama man. Obtain something.
Wala tayo gi-uncheck.
management console.
Tama po to sa tong kano.
Also in the next expiration change here we can see
Sa last page na ako mati.
Wala na yung pin. Pin ako na Wait lang. Ato. Tama man no? 13. 13.
and console. Navigate to the address list. Notice we can now see our workstation.
Ano naman? Ay, inactive.
Wala
Wala,
na.
inactive. Inactive.
Also notice under the lease expiration, it says reservation active. Now you know how to
Inactive ato, wait lang.
10 p.m. Switch the IP configuration to DHCP and see if it grabs the new IP settings we reserved for it. Log into the Windows 10 VM, and when the desktop fully loads, click the Windows button and search for network. Click the Network and Sharing Center when it appears. Select Ethernet 2 and choose Properties. Double-click IP version 4 and check
Kasi sa
the
pikas na
Obtain
Ethernet na po itong Elysian Kent pa yun.
Lipat to. Yan lang.
/DNS address on
Di wala mo
checkbox.
kuan.
Click OK and close all of the network windows.
Ito daw yung sila doon sa pikas na Ethernet
By
Kent.
pressing the Windows key and searching for CMD and run the IP config command. Here we can see our Windows 10 VM has received the IP address
Config. Oh, man to. Good.
Nag-loading lang.
Wala man tao. Ay. Ludeng. Ludeng.
Wala yapon.
Ala. Ano problem?
Elysian doon itong isa ka kuhan daw Kent Ethernet. Daw mo to.
Hanggang saan ito?
Sa Windows na natin.
Ay, kanino? Reservation.
Ay, ito nag-change yung Ethernet ko.
Dala, maka-address. Sige na. Basta, tanaw na sa ba? Signal, mali. Na ako na something na mali. Type ba?
Yeah. Sikat ang ikaduha to ano. Ano ito pagtanaw? CMD ba to?
Zero, ito to? 80. Kita setting. Eight zero 8080027 Aman.
Ano?
Aman. EF. Bakit ngayon ka lang? Bakit ngayon ka lang?
Ito daw sa Ethernet Kent. Ano nga dito?
Sige, wait lang.
Asa ito ba? Dali mo i-click.
Ang sa to. Get mark na to, get mark.
Mo di ba?
Kanay baba. Kanay baba. Tara.
Mangguro i-try lang na ito.
Sige, tara.
Ay, kung Elysian nato na, siya may tabukin.
Umot lang. Ay. I-delete sa nato. Pwede mo nato i-delete.
Ayaw, wait lang. Parehero ang gap.
Arwa, bago.
Ito na lang tayong video daw.
Push.
No, wala to kami. Wala to.
Lord, nagay gisend ni mo, Lord.